Hey guys, so a lot of you guys know I grew up in Newark and Irvington, New Jersey, the inner city, and had dozens and dozens of street fights. And you know, a couple things you learn through experience is most fights end up on the ground, so you got to know how to fight on the ground. A wrestler will always beat a boxer if there's no weapons involved. Um, that's just a fact. But you also learn if you're fighting on the street, you don't want to go to the ground because there's a good chance the guy you're fighting is going to have some friends, and that's the worst place you want to be. So if you go to the ground, which you most likely will, you got to know how to get up off of the ground and fight. So when I got older and became a Christian man, I knew that, fighting was unacceptable, street fighting. But I enjoyed the sport of fighting, and I used to drop into realistic fighting gyms. Back then it was before the term mixed martial arts was coined, MMA. But there were people that understood that you needed a mix of fighting styles, like Bruce Lee, Jeet Kune Do, that was a mix. Judo, Gene LaBelle, he had a great mix of grappling. In fact, if you're not familiar with him, he was one of probably the greatest all-around fighters in his day, and he actually mentored Ronda Rousey, the former female UFC champ. And so I would drop into places like that. I didn't want to go get a gi and a belt and, make rank. I just wanted to have fun fighting. And one place I dropped into before I moved to Florida was a place called Alex Wilkie's Freestyle Karate. It was basically took a lot of stuff from Gene LaBelle, Judo Gene LaBelle, and Bruce Lee, Jeet Kune Do, and kind of mixed it together. So there was grappling night where you did like shoot wrestling. It was like a mixture of regular, freestyle wrestling and sambo and just locks and joint locks and takedowns. And then we would have stand-up night where we mix regular Western boxing with Muay Thai, Savate kickboxing, and Wing Chun was big back then and kind of faded away these days. And it was realistic, and it was fun, and it was pretty rough. I mean, we had one guy, he was like a 5th degree black belt in Kempo karate or something, and he was following some guy that was really popular and really rich because he had this pressure point karate where you can push a pressure point and the people would faint. And I remember him getting choked down. He's trying to hit all these pressure points on one of the guys. And finally, when he woke up, because he went to sleep, and after he woke up, he's like, wow, I guess those pressure points don't work. But anyhow, long story short, one day they said, hey, we're going to have a bunch of these guys from Brazil come over and teach us their style. It was called Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. Unheard of before. This was like 1993, 92, and we had 6 Gracies there, and it's pretty amazing. And they told us, like, in a couple of weeks, one of their brothers, Hoist, was going to go fight in this new thing called the Ultimate Fighting Challenge. And although he wasn't the best fighter out of the bunch, honestly, I knew he was going to win because no one ever seen this before. And sure enough, he just devastated the world. He was like unstoppable. And when I watched the first one, I wasn't surprised that he won, and everybody I was with was surprised, but I wasn't surprised. But what surprised me was the announcers were so ill-informed about this sport. They knew about boxing, they knew about karate, but they didn't know about like realistic fighting, and they just sounded pretty dumb, And so after a few, I don't know how many fights, a guy named Dana White was friends with some rich Italian guys that own casinos in Vegas. He was like a street kid. He was a former boxer, grew up, I think, in Chicago, and he went to his buddies and said, hey, this UFC looks like it could be a money-making machine. The guy wants to sell it for $2 million. So anyway, now it's worth like $10 billion. So he got his boys to buy it for like $2 million. Like I said, now it's got to be worth as much as the NFL, I would think. And so he's the president, Dana White. I'm sure you heard of him. But the best thing he did was he hired Joe Rogan to be the announcer. And I remember watching him, like, oh, I know this guy from Fear Factor, and I wasn't expecting much, And I was amazed. Not only did this guy know what he was talking about, but he was entertaining, he was interested, and he was teaching me. I was like, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that. And, you know, I was working at Consolidated Freight. I was a truck driver for CF before they went out of business. And, you know, the fights were on Saturday nights, and then we would go in Sunday, work overnight from midnight down, you know, on the loading dock. And then if they need us in the morning to make deliveries, we work overtime and, you know, make some local city deliveries. And so the guys would talk in the break room about the fight, and everybody agreed Joe Rogan was the man. Every blue-collar guy loved Joe Rogan. He was just a phenomenon. And so he really knows a lot about fighting. He's an expert. Nobody knows more about fighting than Joe Rogan in my book. And he's also a funny guy. He knows a lot about comedy. He's a funny stand-up comic. One of the funniest things I ever seen him do was call out Carlos Messina. Carlos Messina, another funny comedian, was apparently stealing jokes from all the other comics. And it's funny because they have a little video. You Google it; it's a pretty funny video. Rogan's talking to all these comics. You know, we gotta confront this guy. This ain't right. He's stealing all your jokes. I don't think he stole Rogan's jokes, but a couple of the other guys he stole. But most of the comics were like nerdy guys, and like, no, they were afraid. So Joe Rogan took it upon himself to go on stage and with a microphone why Carlos Mencia was doing stand-up and call him out. And it's pretty, you know, this guy, Joe Rogan's the real deal. And that's, he's got a podcast. It's #1 in the world. And the reason is because he is an authentic guy. He's the real deal. He doesn't try and be something he's not. He's smart and he's knowledgeable about a lot of things. He asks great questions and he's a great interviewer. He's a really smart guy. I mean, he's in his 50s. He looks like he's in his 20s, so he knows he knows a lot about fitness, and he always talks to like cutting edge doctors and scientists, so he really knows his stuff. But one thing he doesn't know much about is church history. And so I have to correct him, and I feel bad because I generally like this guy, but I have to correct Joe Rogan because recently he was interviewing, what's that guy's name? Forget his first name, but I know his last name is Gaffigan. He's actually a Catholic too, but he didn't correct him. I guess, you know, he didn't want to get into theology because they were talking about comedy. But Gaffigan, I can't remember his first name, but he was interviewing Gaffigan, and they're talking about George Carlin, another brilliant comedian. I mean, he's pretty vulgar, but his comedy was very thoughtful, and he was you could tell he was an intelligent guy. Like his bit about these people that run around afraid of climate change is still hilarious and still relevant today. If you check out George Carlin on climate control, it's pretty funny. But then they got on the subject that, you know, this guy knew about everything. And, you know, I read one of his books and he even talked about Martin Luther. And this is where Joe Rogan made his mistake. He talked about something he has no idea. And he was quoting the great theologian George Carlin. So he's like, yeah, Martin Luther, yeah, it was pretty interesting, you know, that Martin Luther was, you know, basically said Martin Luther was a cool guy. He said, you know, Martin Luther was the first man to put the Bible into, you know, a phonetic way where the average person could read it. You know, up until that point, it was in Latin. So you were at the whim of the priest. So in other words, you know, he was saying the Catholic Church purposely kept it in Latin so nobody could read it. The old myth that the Catholic Church doesn't want anybody to read the Bible because then they would know that the Catholic Church wasn't a biblical church. And Martin Luther was this great guy. So I love Joe, but I have to correct him because a lot of people watch his show. And, you know, people just might believe that. So the fact is that before Martin Luther, the Catholic Church has authorized many different translations in many common languages. Most of the world spoke Latin, you know, in the early church. So Latin was the most popular translation. But even in German, before Martin Luther was even born, there was like 20 authorized Catholic translation of the Bible in German. And I'll just mention like 3 that are probably the most popular. In the 4th century, there was a bishop named Wolflia, if I'm pronouncing it right. He translated the Bible into Gothic. Gothic was like an East German language. Then in the 9th century, Charlemagne promoted a Frankish version of the Bible. And then still before Martin Luther was even born, another popular version was translated by Johannes Mantel, called the Mantil Bible. And these were all in German languages before Martin Luther was even born. So, that's the dead myth that goes with, the Catholic Church chained the Bible to the pulpit so no one could read it. The fact is this: they chained the Bible to the pulpit because back then there was no printing press. Before Martin Luther, there was no printing press. So for a Bible to be translated, you would have to hire a scribe, and they would do it on the skins of animals. And thousands of animals would have to be killed and their skins dried out. And they said it would take like years, up to 3 years, for an average scribe to translate the whole Bible. And because of all the animals that were sacrificed and all the time the scribe needed to take, it would take over 3 years' wages. So it was very expensive. So most individuals couldn't afford a Bible, and most of the world was illiterate anyway. So the Catholic Church would buy these Bibles, and because they were so valuable, thieves would try and steal them, so they chained them up. And there's records of even pagan philosophers in Greece, when they would come out and give their speeches, and they would have books, they would chain their books as well. And ancient libraries would chain their books as well, because books were very valuable. It wasn't to keep the people from reading it. And as far as Martin Luther being a good guy, I don't know if Joe Rogan realizes Martin Luther was a very evil person. He called for all the Jews to be killed. He said he was responsible for 100,000 peasants to be murdered, and he was proud of that because that was God's will during the Peasants' War. He said every Jewish synagogue and temple should be burned to the ground. He was an evil, rotten person, Martin Luther. So I love Joe, but he just needs to read his history if he's going to talk about church history. Now, a guy that I don't love, another guy named Joe, who isn't an expert at anything except lying, Joe Biden. I came home from work last night and seen his speech. I seen it live. I got home early yesterday, and I seen it live. And right off the gate, he referred to Vice President Harris as President Harris. So I got to correct him there. She's not the president, and I don't think she ever will be. But then, like he always does, he gets real divisive. He gets people angry, he tries to stir up racial tension, and he yells like a grumpy old man. And he's like, whose side are you going to be on? Well, and at first, he's trying to get rid of the filibuster, because if they get rid of the filibuster in the Senate, then they can run it like, they can turn this country socialist very quickly. This is why, and they're using voting rights as the issue, which is total lies. He's talking about the voter rights, and we can get that into another day, because I got to get in this stop. It's going to be open in a few minutes. But real quick, he shouts out, "What side do you want to be on, Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson Davis?" And I'm like, well, since Jefferson Davis was a Democrat and Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, I guess I want to be on Abraham Lincoln's side. Then he's like, whose side do you want to be on, John Lewis or Bull Connor? Again, Bull Connor was a staunch Democrat. John Lewis at the time was probably Republican. I don't know. He's a Democrat. He died a Democrat. But at the time, Martin Luther King Jr., who he followed, was a Republican. And all the blacks fighting for civil rights were Republicans in the 60s. So, yeah, I don't want to be on Bull Connor's side. I'll stay on the Republican side. And then he goes on, even Strom Thurmond, who was against civil rights, I talked him into, he always lies. And I watch politics my whole life, and I know this guy's lying. And he talks, and when he lies, he always makes himself feel like this cool dude. He's like, yeah, it took me a really long time to convince Strom Thurmond to vote our way, because originally he voted against civil rights, but over the years he changed and voted for civil rights. So again, another lie. When Strom Thurmond voted against civil rights, he was voting with his party. He was a Democrat at the time. When he switched parties and became a Republican, he voted to strengthen civil rights. And that goes, and again, that reminds me of the other lie that the Democrat Party always spews, and that their propaganda machine that call themselves the mainstream media repeats like parrots, is that, the Democrats used to be racist. The Republicans used to be, the party of Abraham Lincoln that freed the slaves. And they were the party that, they have to admit, because the facts are there, they were the party that supported civil rights when the Democrats voted against them. It was all Democrats that were filibustering. Al Gore's father, Al Gore Sr., was filibustering against it. And Joe Biden's good friend, Robert Byrd, who was a former Glenn Kliegel of the KKK, filibustered against civil rights. And while we're at it, Robert Byrd, as a Democrat, former Grand Kliegel of KKK, was voted by his party to be majority leader. They voted him as the leader of the Democrats as late as the 90s. Passed away in 2010, and Joe Biden gave his eulogy and said what a great guy this KKK member was. So the lie that they spew is, the Republicans were on the right side of history. But then after civil rights, all the racist Democrats became Republicans. What a convenient lie. The fact is, if you look at history, and I did this one day, I spent hours looking up every Democrat that voted against civil rights, and only one of them switched parties, and that was Strom Thurmond. And then he voted to strengthen civil rights. So maybe he had an experience with God or whatever. He was convicted. But all the other Democrats that voted against it, Robert KKK Byrd, and every other Democrat, all of Joe Biden's buddies. And, Joe Biden, he came in the 70s, so otherwise he would have voted against it. But he voted against busing, integrating the schools, bringing black and white schools together. And Kamala Harris called him out on that, basically called him a racist. And a famous quote, you can look it up, Joe Biden said he did not want to send his children to a racial jungle. So he was voting against desegregation. He wanted to keep the kids segregated apart. So that's the truth. So I just want to correct Joe Biden on the record. Vice President Harris is not the president, and she probably never will be. And I want to correct my friend Joe Rogan that Martin Luther wasn't a good guy, and he wasn't the first guy to translate the Bible in a language people could understand. So God bless, stay Catholic. And I got good news. So I got a couple of exciting guests that agreed to come on, and one of them is going to be a Blue Collar Scholar, and he is a scholar. He is a Catholic. He's a scholar. Very excited to have this guy on. Very witty, funny, extremely smart, obviously. Former Protestant. This guy, I am so excited, I can't even tell you. But I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to have you guess. If whoever guesses who this scholar on the next segment of Blue Collar and the Scholar is, I'll let you ask a question, and I'll ask him, because I have a lot of questions for this guy. This guy, he's a Catholic scholar, a philosophical scholar. I mean, there's, the list goes on. This guy is legit. You're going to be amazed at his background and where he's at now, and you're really interesting guy to listen to. It's going to be Blue Collar and a Scholar. We're looking at probably 2 weeks. We just got to settle on the date, and then I'll announce them. And I also got a former Protestant preacher, pastor, really cool dude, really fun. Really looking forward to this guy. We're gonna have a really fun interview. We're gonna lock that down. And once I lock that down, I'll give you the date for that as well, and give you his name as well. But pray for me because, you know, I like to do my interviews in the morning because, you know, I'm a morning person. I get up early, drink some coffee. And, you know, my last two I did, it was great with it was a blue collar and a scholar was the last one I did. Dr. Jules Gomez from Church Militant, the former Anglican priest who became Catholic. And then the one before that was Steve Ray. And just feel like I have a lot more energy and I'm more on point, and it just flows a lot better than when I come home at work. You know, I get up at 3 a.m. and by the time I get to, you know, get home and get ready for the interview, it's like 5. And but my weekends are pretty packed out now. So I'm going to be doing these during the week. So pray that God gives me the energy physically like he does spiritually. He always gives us the energy when our flesh is weak, because the spirit is willing. So pray for me. And like I said, give me your best guess on the blue collar and scholar guest. God bless and stay Catholic.